Welcome, and thank you all for coming. I'm Eileen Galuli, and my role as acting director of the Hyman Center for the Humanities this year, it's my pleasure to welcome you and to introduce tonight's guest speakers. Tonight's event is part of an occasional series at the center entitled Writing Lives, in which prominent novelists, poets, memoirists, biographers, and other storytellers chronicle their own lives or the lives of others. Lives individual or collective, lives recalled or imagined. The format for the series is somewhat flexible, but as in the case this evening, it often puts into conversation writers whose storytelling is what we might call generically diverse. That is, that it draws variously on fiction, nonfiction, biography, history, and autobiography in productive, inventive, and sometimes startling ways. Before I introduce the speakers, I'm going to tell you about 4 more Writing Lives events this semester. Next week, on Wednesday, February 20th, the Tony Award-winning playwright David Henry Hwang will be in conversation with theater director Gregory Mosher and the theater scholar Gene Howard. 2 weeks later, on March 6th, we'll welcome Nick Hornby, whose work includes the novels High Fidelity and About a Boy, both the basis of feature films. And he'll be in conversation with the Barnard professor and poet Saskia Hamilton. On Thursday, April 11th, Dr. Uzo Dimna Iweala, the author of the acclaimed novel Beasts of No Nation, will read from his new novel in progress, which is called Speak No Evil, and is a series of interlinked narratives set in Washington, D.C. And then finally, on Wednesday, May 1st, 3 writers, all of whom work on the subject of family, will discuss their new books. The historian Deborah Cohen, author most recently of Family Secrets, will converse with the novelist Julie Oringer, author of The Invisible Bridge and How to Breathe Underwater, and Colm Tobin, the author of many best-selling and critically acclaimed novels, including most recently The Testament of Mary. But tonight, I'm delighted to say, we have 3 different and equally wonderful novelists who will talk about their work. They are, alphabetically, Ellis Avery, Myung-Ok Lee, and Justin Torres. Ellis Avery, who will moderate tonight's discussion, is an award-winning novelist and assistant professor in the creative writing program at the School of the Arts here at Columbia. Her first novel, The Tea House Fire, which won Lambda, Ohioana, and American Library Association awards, has been translated into 5 languages. Her most recent work is The Last Nude, which was published in 2012. The Last Nude imagines the relationship of painter Tamara de Lempicka and her model Rafaela in 1920s Paris, and was praised by the Washington Post, NPR, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the Boston Globe, which called it a work of called that work both an act of courage and a display of exceptional talent. Marie Myung-Ok Lee is the acclaimed author of the novel Somebody's Daughter and of stories and essays in the Kenyon Review, Newsweek, the New York Times, the Atlantic, the Guardian, and the Washington Post. Her young adult fiction has won numerous awards, including an American Library Association Best Book for Young Adults Award and a Best Book Award from the Friends of American Writers. Marie Lee founded the Asian American Writers Workshop, a nonprofit literary arts organization established to support Asian American writers, literature, and community. A member of the undergraduate creative writing faculty at Columbia University, she's also a regular contributor to Slate and Salon.com. Her most recent work, a novel entitled Firstborn Son, will be published in 2014 by Simon & Schuster. And finally, Justin Torres. Justin Torres is the author of We the Animals, his multiple prize-winning, highly lyrical first novel. The book has been so widely and positively reviewed that the reviews themselves occupy a significant number of the scant 100 pages. Torres' fiction has appeared in The New Yorker, Granta, Tin House, Glimmer Train, The Guardian, and Harper's. He's a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop and has held a number of prestigious fellowships, including a United States Artist Fellowship in Literature, a Wallace Stegner Fellowship at Stanford, and currently a fellowship at the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard. His new novel, In Progress, explores the life of a sex worker. Please join me in welcoming Ellis Avery, Marie Lee, and Justin Torres.
So I have little introductions for these amazing authors that I will read to you, and then they will read to you, and then I'll ask them some questions, and then you'll ask them some questions. Pulitzer Prize winner Paul Harding said, "We the animals snatches the readers by the scruff of the heart, tight as teeth, and shakes back and forth between the human and the animal, the housed and the feral, love and violence, mercy and wrath, and leaves him in the wilderness, ravished by its beauty." I agree. This is a glistening, roiling story of 5 outsiders alone in the great white north of upstate New York, of 3 brothers who both desperately need and as desperately resist passion, tenderness, violence, and mental illness of their 2 very young parents, and of one boy, the youngest brother, who discovers he needs to make his way apart from the people he loves most. Marie Lee's first novel for adults, Somebody's Daughter, is based on her year as a Fulbright scholar in Korea, taking oral histories of Korean birth mothers. She has been involved in the adoptee community for many years, but Lee herself is not adopted, though one of her family members is adopted from Korea. Somebody's Daughter tells the story of a half-Korean child adopted by a white Minnesotan family who returns to Korea at 19 to find the mother who gave her up. It is simultaneously the story of the Korean woman forced by poverty and stigma to give up her half-American daughter. As mother and daughter search, and in a heartbreaking climax, even brush past one another, both come to learn that in some ways they have outgrown the need to find one another, while in other ways, even finding one another would fail to heal the damage caused by having been forced apart. It takes courage to write an adoption story that both inflames the reader's hopes and douses them so soundly, but Lee pulls it off with generosity toward all. Ms. Lee's current project, Firstborn Son, recently purchased by Simon & Schuster, offers as compassionately funny an investigation of the immigrant psyche and as relentless a skewering of the institution of for-profit gynecology as Jonathan Franzen's Frieden did for white liberal middle-class mores and mountaintop removal, respectively. Following the misfortunes of a father and son pair of gynecologists, an immigrant generation father and first-generation American son, as they contend with SANUS, that's an acronym, the for-profit hospital taking over the Twin Cities. Lee strikes both tragic notes as her older hero gets crushed by the new corporate order, and picaresque notes as her younger hero strives after its false promises. Ms. Lee has written a great American novel, one that tackles the terror and the promise of our bloated, lonely, hopeful nation. In the coming couple of years, please keep your eyes open for this ambitious, powerful, and mordantly funny book.
Thank you for the multiple introductions. I love that. It's just like wonderful things being said about me over and over.
And we mean them all.
I'm going to read the first chapter, and then I'll read something else. I'm not sure what yet. We'll see. The first chapter is called We Wanted More. We wanted more. We knocked the butt ends of our forks against the table, tapped our spoons against our empty bowls. We were hungry. We wanted more volume, more riots. We turned up the knob on the TV until our ears ached with the shouts of angry men. We wanted more music on the radio. We wanted beats. We wanted rock. We wanted muscles on our skinny arms. We had bird bones, hollow and light, and we wanted more density, more weight. We were 6 snatching hands, 6 stomping feet. We were brothers, boys, 3 little kings locked in a feud for more. When it was cold, we fought over blankets until the cloth tore down the middle. When it was really cold, when our breath came out in frosty clouds, Manny crawled into bed with Joel and me. Body heat, he said. Body heat, we agreed. We wanted more flesh, more blood, more warmth. When we fought with boots and garage tools, snapping pliers. We grabbed at whatever was nearest and we hurled it through the air. We wanted more broken dishes, more shattered glass. We wanted more crashes. And when our pops came home, we got spankings. Our little round butt cheeks were tore up, red, raw, leather-whipped. We knew there was something on the other side of pain, on the other side of the sting. Prickly heat radiated upward from our thighs and backsides. Fire consumed our brains, but we knew that there was something more, some place our Pops was taking us with all this. We knew because he was meticulous, because he was precise, because he took his time. He was awakening us. He was leading us somewhere beyond burning and ripping, and you couldn't get there in a hurry. And when our father was gone, we wanted to be fathers. We hunted animals. We drudged through the muck of the creek, chasing down bullfrogs and water snakes. We plucked the baby robins from their nest. We liked to feel the beat of tiny hearts, the struggle of tiny wings. We brought their tiny animal faces close to ours. "Who's your daddy?" we said. Then we laughed and tossed them into a shoebox. Always more, always hungrily scratching for more. But there were times, quiet moments, when our mother was sleeping, when she hadn't slept in 2 days, and any noise, any stair creak, any shut door, any stifled laugh, any voice at all might wake her. Those still crystal mornings we wanted to protect her, this confused goose of a woman, this stumbler, this gusher, with her backaches and headaches and her tired ways, this uprooted Brooklyn creature, this tough talker, always with tears when she told us she loved us, her mixed-up love, her needy love, her warmth. Those mornings when sunlight found the cracks in our blinds and laid itself down in crisp strips on our carpet. Those quiet mornings when we'd fix ourselves oatmeal and sprawl into our stomachs with crayons and paper, with glass marbles that we were careful not to rattle, when our mother was sleeping, when the air did not smell like sweat or breath or mold, when the air was still and light. Those mornings when silence was our secret game and our gift and our sole accomplishment. We wanted less weight, less work, less noise, less father, less muscles and skin and hair. We wanted nothing, just this. And now I'll read something more kind of cheery. Just kidding. There's nothing cheery in this book. No, that's not wow. All right. Usually, I was going to read this kind of racy chapter that I think maybe I won't read. There are young ones here. I'll read 7. I'll read this chapter called 7. In the morning, we stood side by side in the doorway and looked in on Ma, who slept open-mouthed, and we listened to the air struggle to get past the saliva in her throat. 3 days ago, she had arrived home with both cheeks swollen purple. Pops had carried her into the house and brought her to the bed, where he stroked her hair and whispered in her ear. He told us the dentist had been punching on her after she went under. He said that's how they loosen up the teeth before they rip them out. Ma had been in bed every day since, plastic vials of pain pills, glasses of water, half-drunk mugs of tea, and bloody tissues cluttered the floor around her bed. Pops had forbidden us to step foot in the bedroom, and for 3 mornings we had heeded, monitoring her breath from the doorway, but today we would not wait any longer. We tiptoed to her side and traced our fingers over her bruises. Mom murmured at our touch, but did not wake. It was the morning of my 7th birthday, which meant winter, but the light glowed in the curtain like spring. Manny walked to the window, pulled the curtain around him, and covered himself so that only his face was visible. One Sunday, because we had begged her to, Ma took us to a church service. And there we saw a painting of men in hoods with clasped hands and eyes lifted upward. Monks, Ma had said. They study God. Monks, Manny whispered now, and we understood. Joel draped himself in the sheet that had been kicked to the floor, and I grabbed the other curtain, and like monks we waited. Except it was Ma we were studying, her black tangled hair, her shut eyes, and her bloated jowl. We watched the tiny form of her under the covers, a twitch or kick, and the steady rise and fall of her chest. When she finally spoke, she called us beautiful. My beautiful baby boys, she said. The first words out of her busted mouth in 3 days, and it was too much. We turned from her. I pressed my hand against the glass, suddenly embarrassed, needing the cold. That's how it sometimes was with Ma. I needed to press myself against something cold and hard, or I'd get dizzy. It's his birthday, Manny said. Happy birthday, Ma said, the words slightly tinged with pain. He's 7, Manny said. Ma nodded her head slowly and shut her eyes. He'll leave me, now he's 7. What's that supposed to mean? Joel asked. When you boys turned 7, you left me, shut yourselves off from me. That's what big boys do, what 7-year-olds do. I moved both hands to the class, caught the cold and pressed it to my cheeks. I won't. They changed, Ma said, turning her head to me, wriggled away when I tried to cuddle them, wouldn't sit still on my lap. I had to let them go, had to harden my heart. They wanted to smash things, to wrestle. My brothers looked confused but oddly proud. Manny winked to Joel. "Aw," he said, "it ain't like that." "Isn't it?" Ma asked. "I don't want to smash nothing," I said. "I want to study God and never get married." "Good," Ma said. "Then you'll stay 6 forever." "That's just stupid," Joel said. Ma raised a slow hand for silence on the subject. "Will you get up today?" I asked. "How do I look?" "Purple," I said. "Crazy," said Joel. "Tore up," said Manny. "But it's your birthday," Ma said to me. "But it's my birthday." She slid the covers down to her waist and brought her hands up to her face, delicately protecting her cheeks, as if a hand might fly through the air at any moment. Then she raised herself up. Then her feet were on the floor. Then she was standing in her green football jersey with bare legs, thin as anything, and painted toes. A brass-handled mirror lay on the bureau, and as soon as Ma raised it to her face, tears came and sat on her eyelids, waiting to fall. Ma could hold tears on her eyelids longer than anyone. Some days she walked around like that for hours, holding them there, not letting them drop. On those days she would trace her finger over the shapes of things, or hold the telephone on her lap, silent, and you had to call her name 3 times before she'd give you her eyes. Now, Ma held the tears and studied her ugliness. The 3 of us boys started to back out of the room, but she called for me, said she wanted to talk to me about saying 6. But she didn't say much beyond that. Just looked and looked in that mirror, turning her jaw at different angles. "What did he do to me?" she asked. "He punched you in the face," I said, "to loosen up your teeth." I jumped at the sound of shattering glass. My brother's 2 heads instantly appeared back in the doorway, smiling wide, running their eyes from Ma to me to the broken pieces of mirror, to the spot on the wall where it had been flung, to Ma, to me. Ma's hands were up protecting her cheeks again, and her eyes were shut. When she spoke, she said each word slow and clear. "You think it's funny when men beat on your mother." My brother's smiles dropped to frowns. They disappeared again. I went and wrapped myself back up in the curtain, leaned my forehead against the window pane. The light reflected back and forth from the white sky to the snow. The light caught in the frost on the window. Outside, it was too bright to focus on any one spot. I opened my eyes as wide as I could, and they burned with light. And I thought about going blind, about how everyone said if you looked right up into the sun, full on, and held your gaze, you'd go blind. But when I tried, I could not blind myself. Ma sat on the edge of the bed, breathing loud and slow, forgiving me. She called for me to sit on her lap, and I came, and we breathed together. Then Ma started in on my favorite song, about a woman with feathers and oranges, and Jesus Christ walking on the water. My head stretched all the way up to her shoulder, but she rocked me, and hummed the words she had forgotten. "Promise me," she said. "Promise me you'll stay 6 forever." "How?" "Simple. You're not 7. You're 6 plus 1. And next year you'll be 6 plus 2. Like that. Forever." "Why?" When they ask how old you are, and you say I'm 6 plus 1 or 2 or more, you'll be telling them that no matter how old you are your Ma's baby boy. And if you stay my baby boy, then I'll always have you, and you won't shy away from me, won't get slick and tough, and I won't have to harden my heart. You stop loving them when they turn 7? Don't be simple, Ma said. She brushed my hair back from my forehead. Loving big boys is different from loving little boys. You've got to meet tough with tough. It makes me tired sometimes, that's all. And you, I don't want you to leave me. I'm not ready. Then Ma leaned in and whispered more in my ear, told me more about why she needed me 6. She whispered it all to me, her needs so big, no softness anywhere, only pops and boys turning into pops. It wasn't just the cooing words, but the damp of her voice, the tinge of pain. It was the warm closeness of her bruises that sparked me. I turned into her, saw the swollen mound on either side of her face, the muddied purple skin ringed in yellow. Those bruises looked so sensitive, so soft, so capable of hurt, and this thrill, this spark, surged from my gut, spread through my chest, this wicked tingle down the length of my arms and into my hands. I grabbed hold of both her cheeks and pulled her toward me for a kiss. The pain traveled sharp and fast to her eyes. Pain opened up her pupils into big black discs. She ripped her face from mine and shoved me away from her to the floor. She cussed me and Jesus, and the tears dropped, and I was 7. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Justin and Ellis and Eileen and the Hyman Center for having us. Wow. I'm almost embarrassed. I love We the Animals, and it's so lapidary, and my book is gigantic. It was actually 800 pages when it was submitted to publishers. So it's also a billion characters, so I'm going to also just read the first chapter because I didn't know where to start. And the thing you should know about it that when you're reading that's different is it's a Korean couple, and the wife's name is Myung-A, and the husband's name is Young Man. So you can remember the husband is Young Man because he's a man. And I'll just start. And so it's Myung-A and Young Man, her husband, and their son Einstein. Myung-A Kwok knew it to be still early. The air had that uniform morning stillness and carried the yeasty sweet smell of sandwich rolls baking at the Piggly Wiggly that she could see from her vantage point of 207 Summit Drive, the only hill in town. As the steam from the Piggly Wiggly, where, she imagined, the hairy-armed Mr. Norvald was placing tray after tray of pale dough into the maw of the industrial oven, rose in silent puffs, the only sound she could hear was the diminished roar of a faraway truck. To the east of Pill Hill, where all the doctors lived, stood a billboard on County Road 22 that greeted you to the town of Horse's Breath. A 20-foot-tall miner, arm extended. Stop! You are entering Horse's Breath, Minnesota, population 10,483, home of Don Donaldson, inventor of the pizza roll-up, and the Hull Rust Mine, the Grand Canyon of the Midwest. Plus, the world's largest crappie caught at Big Dick Lake, 1984. Next to the sign was the one stoplight in town, still blinking yellow. This told Myung-A better than her watch that it was not yet 7 o'clock. The lights were set to yellow every night by Mr. Griffin, the chief of police, so that if one of the not uncommon power surges from the Iron Range Electric Co. knocked out the timer, no one would be stuck waiting at the red, like Ole Olson had, returning from dinner at his son's out at Beauty Lake. He'd sat in his truck until Chief Griffith came out and found old Ole steadfastly waiting. He told Ole it was okay to run a red in this situation, as long as he looked both ways, and he wouldn't give him a ticket. Myung-A knew all this because Police Chief Griffith's mother-in-law was sister to Reverend Halverson's mother, who was great-aunt to Mrs. Spanakovich, the biggest blabbermouth in town. In fact, that Sunday at the church school at the Lutheran Church of the Good Shepherd, the quiet law-abidingness of Ole Olson was used as an object lesson. How you act when no one's looking was just as important as how you act when someone is. Of course, in the lesson, they didn't mention Ole's unfortunate, but still heroic to Myung-A's mind, urination in the cab of his truck when he could hold his postprandial schlitzes no longer. Myung-A sipped her tea, pleasantly burnt. Some people liked the taste of burnt toast in the morning. She liked burnt rice. To make it, she'd shook out a handful of Uncle Ben's onto some wax paper, smashed it with her chicken piccata mallet, boiled it down until all the water evaporated, and it roasted to a smoking crust. The traffic light stopped blinking yellow. then reappeared as a cool, steady green. She could almost make out the 2 dabs of red taillight of Chief Griffith's police cruiser driving away. Now it was 7 o'clock. Myung-Ok commensurately accelerated like a NASCAR driver, the rubber soles of her slippers squeaking on the floor as she raced toward the phone. The invention of time zones, such a gift. 7 was too early to call, but in Greenwich, Connecticut, where her son Einstein lived, it was already 8. She grabbed the phone, pondering on how the numbers on their last phone had actually worn away, the 1 fading first, until the keypad was a series of blind plastic nubs, like the ones lining the sole of her husband Youngman's acupressure sandals. Youngman had renumbered the phone with a permanent marker, the kind they used to mark the site for surgery so they wouldn't accidentally saw off the wrong leg. Myung-Ok couldn't understand how her husband, who had memorized all the medical names down to the smallest of the body's 207 bones, incus, malleus, stapes, but could not commit the number of his own son to memory. Her child was part of her, and so her mind, her fingers, her body remembered. Just this week, a box had been delivered to their door by Federal Express. It was from Einstein, sending her and Youngman a replacement for their old pink princess phone. The new phone was made out of a zinc-colored plastic, its base station looking like some kind of computer capable of launching the space shuttle. Thus, unlike the princess phone with its curly cord, having lost most of its curliness back in the 80s, this one you could carry around wherever you wanted to. The magic phone took messages and could even ask you thoughtful questions in an audible but slightly robotic voice. Commit new number to memory. Plus, she noted with glee, this phone came with caller ID, a service that had just become available in Horse's Breath, so now they would get to surprise and mystify their friends. What touched her further was her son's obvious worry about them, the huge buttons, police, fire, emergency. This last one was where Einstein's number went, that you could program to dial for you. Youngman had, incredibly, responded by calling Einstein to tell them their current phone worked perfectly fine. That cumbersome sebum-smelling phone, the one you needed a pencil to dial if you had your nails done. Not that Myung-Ok ever did this, but if she did. Myung-Ok hurriedly reaccepted the gift, but she feared the fun had gone out of the giving for her son, just a bit. Hello, arg, that check bird woman voice of her daughter-in-law. At least she trained herself not to reflexively hang up when Marnie answered, as apparently this caller ID thing worked both ways. Good morning, Marnie. A pause. An early morning call. Marnie Sneeden Kwok had been hoping for something out of the ordinary, like the lottery people calling to tell her that she'd won the extreme jackpot on her Mega Millions ticket, her guilty little habit when she gassed up the Lexus. Instead, her mother-in-law. Should have known. It's Marnie. After 10 years, Myung-Ok, you really should know that. That's what I said, Marnie. You said Manny. Myung-Ok knew what she said. Only in the Korean alphabet, when the R and the N were side by side, the sound became a melodious blended sound. Koreans, whose last name would be pronounced no, see, in English you did this too, often spelled it R-N-O. Is it really so hard to say Marnie? Marnie? Marie? Did she even know what she's trying to say anymore? And why did she have to be so vexed first thing in the morning? Put Einstein on the phone. He's still at the hospital. Oh, okay, bye. Maybe she could catch Einstein at work. She hit the speed dial, the number 2 button, fire, marveling again at how this gadget could dial faster than even her virtuoso fingers. Beep, blap, beep, blap. She wasn't surprised when no one answered, as Einstein was rarely sitting in his office. She pressed police to dial his pager. Inputted 303, MOM if you turned it on the side. Myung-Ok wandered into the kitchen. Redial 303. She hit redial again, 303, digging her thumbnail into the springy nub for emphasis. Redial. This, her 4th, 5th time. Redial. Finally! Einstein! Mom? Is everything okay? Is father all right? Einstein Alfred Nobel Kwok, M.D., was conditioned to react catastrophically to pages. Father? Excuse me, but who had changed Einstein's diapers? Not his father. Everything is just hunky-dory up here on Pill Hill. Oh, phew. So how's his second day of retirement going? If you're so interested in your father, why don't you talk to him yourself? Myung-Ok wanted to say this, but realized Einstein would probably dutifully reply, okay, put him on. Then as Youngman and Einstein would have their stiff conversations about blood flow or baby weights, whatever else, in their shared doctor language, she would just be left standing there, reddening, like some stove ember that burns itself up out of spite. You know your father. It's hard for him not being a doctor anymore. I'm going to try to get him to come out grocery shopping with me later. Sounds good. You know, I'm prepping for surgery, a C-section, so I better go. Myung-Ok had this urge that she needed to test out his love. I do need to talk to you about something. She racked her brains to think about what. She stared at the coupons held to the refrigerator by a plastic magnet that looked convincingly like a piece of Torres sushi. I really better go. He actually should have been already in pre-op. I need to talk to you, she said, about the move. Can I call you back? I really need to leave now to keep the surgery on time. Okay, go then. Just go. Make your boss but not your mother happy. A pause. Mom, you're being passive-aggressive. Me? Aggressive? What are you saying? I'm just your old mother. I told you, go! Hurry up! You're wasting time talking to your old mother. You should worry about the health of your patient, even though I'm not going to be here forever either. Okay, sound of slow, deliberate breathing. I'm sorry for rushing, but I can't read your mind, Mom. Can you just tell me what you want? You should know, Myung-Ok thought accusingly. If a baby cries, the mother just knows what it needs. I'd like you to try to get up here on Friday. It's important to me. Friday? I've already rearranged my weekend call. It would be hard to ask for the whole day off on Friday, too. Myung-Ok was suddenly aggrieved. This wasn't just some weekend visit. They were going to sift through their house's entire history, say goodbye to their past. So busy, Einstein always said. Inside Myung-Ok came a faint stirring, like the beginnings of gas. Einstein, I'm going to get all choked up about this. We're going to say goodbye to the house, and we need to all be together as a family. Silence. Was her son starting to tear up too, Myung-Ok wondered, a tad hopefully. Okay, Mom, I'll see what I can arrange. I'll talk to Dr. Dappleforth about it. Einstein regretted just downing 3 coffees in quick succession. He'd have to skip going to the bathroom to keep the surgery on time. Dappleforth ran his ORs like a German general. You promise? Promise. A smile slowly spread over Myung-Ok's face. He's coming Friday, she sang to the air. Now she could give herself permission to dream, envision them sitting at their dining room table for a leisurely Sunday dinner without the overhang of dread because they'd be leaving the next day. She'd get lots of beer for Einstein. Marnie liked that buttery poppycock mix they made at Edie Claire's and Way More Bakery. Reggie required pizza roll-ups, as he could not go to sleep without a snack. She'd have to make bulgogi one night. Mandu, too. And why not bake some Toll House cookies? When Einstein's family was visiting, she wished they had multiple stomachs like a camel so she could keep on feeding them. Don't involve me in this. Youngman must have arisen, for now he was muttering in Korean from behind the Horse's Breath Tribune as he sat in his lazy boy recliner. Youngman preferred speaking in Korean, even though it was an antiquated version, its idioms rusted shut, that he'd boxed and packed with him in 1959. Why do you continue to bother him? He's busy with his own life now. An empty nest is a sign of success. How can our son not say goodbye to the house where he grew up? Myung-Ok spoke pointedly in English. She was getting all wet-eyed again. She actually liked feeling the salt water gushing to fill the bladders of her tear ducts. Why? Because it proved to her that she wasn't 100% dead inside, which is how she often felt when she woke. These days, emerging from a warm, amniotic sack of sleep to face the day's harsh glare was almost scary. To smell the beginnings of decay everywhere, to look at herself in the mirror and think, how did you let yourself get so old? And with him. It was only his second day of retirement. Yesterday, he had seemed to be deliberately obstructing wherever she wanted to go, in front of the kitchen sink, the bathroom, the hall closet, yet while never doing anything. Young-hae had felt as if all her insides had been replaced with a bag stuffed full of thistles that poked her whichever way she moved or even breathed. At noon, he'd come calling for his lunch. Here was someone who for the past 40 years had his lunch served to him in the physician's dining room. So how could he just transfer the responsibility without any kind of discussion? The hospital staff got paid, and she ate whenever she was hungry. Sometimes the day was just a series of nibbles of this and that. She was not going to appreciate Youngman showing up every day right at the bonging of the town hall clock. Yesterday, rather than sit and actually contemplate what her days might look like from here on in, she distracted herself by constructing a sandwich for Youngman, an assemblage of orphans, last night's bulgogi, bread and butter pickles, a squirt of wasabi, chopped carrots, Miracle Whip, a limp but serviceable piece of lettuce, a smear of raspberry jam. But as Youngman started giving her directives, mustard instead of Miracle Whips, etc., she clapped the 2 pieces of bread together like cymbals and told him to make his own adjustments. He didn't even know that in a moment of utter mercy, she tweezed an eye of green mold from one of the pieces of bread. She went up to their room in a huff, took a nap, pretended that Youngman was merely on vacation, that she'd have her quiet, unscheduled time back to herself. Today, she had a yearning for noodles in cold anchovy broth. She planned to put ice cubes in the broth until it was cold as punch. In a rare coincidence of desire and timing, there were 2 pears in the fruit bowl, perfectly ripened to make matchstick slices on top. The noodles would go down salty, cold, and good, the savor of the broth perfectly offset by the sweet crunch of pear. She shut her eyes, remembered the boy, dashing, if a bit on the lanky side, in his prestigious navy blue Paget high school uniform, with the smart cap with the black visor. His eyes had sparkled so. She remembered the pouts of the bigger-eyed, prettier girls, her flushed feeling of triumph. All right, she would make noodles for 2, with matchstick slices of pear on top, a dish of kimchi to provide the heat to offset the cold. She would cut the noodles. Youngman did say that his teeth were bothering him, and then he wouldn't have to chew as much. She went out to ask Youngman if he wanted to add mustard oil. She imagined he might say, "Nungman season starting, huh? Your Nungman is the best." Youngman remained obscured behind his newspaper. What was visible? Pale, waxy feet. Sandsbelt slacks gone shiny at the knees. His toenails needed trimming again. His buttocks had sunk into the recliner so deep the chair looked like it was eating and digesting him. One arm was propped on the armrest where sat a gnawed core of a pear, spreading an ugly wet stain. She returned to the kitchen. 1 lone pear. She picked it up from the bowl, instinctively squeezing it for ripeness. It burst in her hand, liquid slime running down her arm. Youngman had obviously gotten to the fruit bowl first, groping, comparing, extracting the best one for himself, left the inedible one for her, didn't even bother to put it in the waste bin. Now the cold noodles would be too salty, the briny kimchi only making it worse. "You!" She pulled down the newspaper with a karate chop. He blinked, like a mole exposed to light. "What?" he said in a voice that was starting to become old and decayed, like his teeth, with their dun-colored fissures. "What now?" You, passive-aggressive!" she screamed. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin and Marie, so much. Thank you, Eileen and the Hyman Center, for having us. I want to start by thinking about your books together, your work together. It seems like you're both interested in the fantasy of belonging and the gritty reality of individuation. For Justin, it comes up in his use of we and us throughout the first 3/4 of his novel, which becomes heartbreakingly a they by the end, or in the 3-beat chant that the 4 men in the family develop in Night Watch. No more work. No more floor. No more coffee cups. No more crying. For Marie, it comes up in the longing that Sarah Thorson, in Somebody's Mother, has to belong to her she's the adopted child adopted from Korea, has to belong to her Korean mother. And in Marie's new novel, that Einstein has to please his father, his mother, his boss, and his wife. And of course, in both your cases, the books complicate and break up that fantasy of belonging, leaving your speakers, in some ways, more alone than when they started. Then this is a separate but related thing, which is that what I love is that while you write about selfish and self-defending children, you also see their parents as separate, complete, fully individuated, real people. Marie does this by shifting to the parental point of view in both Somebody's Daughter and in Firstborn Son. Justin does this in the first 3/4 or so of We the Animals by treating the three brothers as an aggregate against which the two parents really stand out as individuals, especially in opposition to each other. So, if either of you would like, or both of you preferably, would like to talk about belonging and individuation in your work, we would love to hear it. And if you'd prefer a more focused question, I can give you that too. The focused version of this question is, and it might be too focused, is what would you recommend to a creative writing student whose young characters feel a little too wrapped up in themselves to be interesting?
One of the things that I wouldn't say that Somebody's Daughter is autobiographical, obviously, because it's not autobiographical because I'm not adopted. But one of the things I sort of realized after I'd written it was that because of the way that I grew up in a really small town in Minnesota called Hibbing, which is actually where Bob Dylan is from, and it's a completely isolated mining town where the nearest Minneapolis is over 4 hours away, so it's kind of in the middle of nowhere. And also, my parents came to the U.S. in '53 when there were very few other Korean families. And, of course, our town was so white that people had been there for generations. And they would have, the library's going to have, Mrs. Hallstrom's going to show her pictures from when she went to Sweden. And there was kind of no space for, a family of color. So at school, even from kindergarten, I had kids punching me in the face and calling me chink. But at the same time, what I didn't realize about my parents is that they had gone through such trauma, first going from North Korea to South Korea, and then coming here. And what I didn't know at the time, the first place they came in the 50s was in Jim Crow, Alabama. So they're going from the most homogenous country in the whole world to, having to navigate the shoals of Jim Crow racism. And then they're in Minnesota, which is completely white. And so they just had such a sort of an immigrant kind of hanging on by your fingernails experience that there wasn't any room for us to sort of be unhappy or experience racism. And so I remember one time, I'd gotten beaten up at school and coming home and telling my parents, and they were just both so shocked that I knew just instinctively that I wasn't supposed to talk about it and that we were supposed to pretend that everything was great. And so in my own weird way, I grew up with kids calling me chink at school, but then in the home, I didn't know what Korea was because my parents had been so traumatized they didn't want to talk about it. So it became this weird sort of other alien planet that wasn't real to me either. So since I existed in between the two, this cultural dislocation I'm realizing was almost exactly what what I felt like I tapped into with Sarah's when there's this scene where she's looking in the mirror and she's surprised there's no white person there because she's surrounded by white people. But at the same time, where that's not exactly my experience, but that something like that was exactly sort of metaphorically how I felt. Because the whole idea for me fitting in was I have to be white because everything around me is white. But then when my friends all put on their blue eyeshadow, and I somehow didn't look right, and it's not that I didn't understand that I was different, but it was just I just felt like through some kind of force of will I could fit in. And that was just this kind of resistance that I think is probably driving my work still and probably always will.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I think that I related to a lot of what you were saying now. I think the question of belonging and individuation is central to the book that I wrote. It's the question that I wanted to address. This is about a narrator who is ejected from the family, but by the end of the book, and feels very much a part of the family in the beginning of the book. And I think that because similarly to what you were saying, because this is a mixed family growing up in a very homogenous town, they belong to each other all the more. I mean, I think that it's the force of the outside pressures makes what happens in your private little domestic world, your home, so special and unique, and the rules of your universe belong only to you. And you know, I think that in my own personal experience, I would go to other homes, and because they were nothing, I mean, my parents were extremely young and, you know, mixed and from Brooklyn, and I'd go to somebody else's house, and I mean, it was this kind of, there was a certain kind of uniform culture that I didn't have that back in my own home. So I think that that's like an interesting, I think it's a great thing for a writer, and maybe to kind of transition to your other question about you know, young writers, I think a great thing to think about is like, what worlds do you belong to, and what worlds are you, you know, what worlds do you have access to that maybe aren't your own? And I think that for me, like, I grew up, you know, with the expectation of being straight, and I was not. I don't know if you guys figured that out. Just let the cat out of the bag. And I grew up, you know what I mean, in a very white town, and you know, I'm not, but nor did I grow up in Brooklyn with the rest of my family, you know, in the projects. That's not where I'm from either. And so, but I feel like I've got access to all these different worlds, and like always being in that in-between space and staying there, I think is a great kind of thing to do when writing, if that's possible. Yeah.
Thanks. You're both really interested in children who passionately resist the people who love them the most. In your chapter, Ducks, Justin, you write about the fear of needing more than your mother can. You write about the protagonist's fear of needing more than his mother can give him. After having packed up her sons and run away from her abusive and cheating husband, which is kind of thrilling for the boys, she asks them what she should do. And her weakness really disappoints and turns them against her. In You Better Come, the three brothers beat up both their parents, turning into, as you say, little animals clawing at what we needed. Sarah Thorson, the Korean-born protagonist of Somebody's Mother, also turns against her adoptive mother, Christine, because, again, she needs more than Christine can give her. She doesn't just need a home or even love. She also needs a sense of who she is and where she comes from. What is your favorite moment of mother-child betrayal or mother-child inter-betrayal, either that you've written or that you've read?
I mean, the first thing, I can answer this right away.
Great.
Is Dorothy Allison's Bastard Out of Carolina. I don't know if you guys have read that book, but
you should.
It's an amazing book, and kind of at the center of the book is this really profound and deep love between a daughter and her mother, and then there's the stepfather who enters the picture, and he is absolutely horrible and does the worst things imaginable to tear that relationship apart. And at the end of the book, she basically chooses her man.
She, the mother.
She, the mother, basically chooses her man. And it is the way that Allison forgives and understands and still holds responsible that act of betrayal is, it's heartbreaking and amazing. And I think it speaks volumes to the ways in which we kind of fail each other in family relationships.
I think mine would be Flannery O'Connor is one of my favorite writers, and I believe the biography was written by Blake Bailey, but I'm not sure. And when I was I actually went to Flannery O'Connor's house, and so I could worship there. And just seeing how despite her illness, like how she still managed to work and just get out and her birds. And then I read in this biography about her mother, and apparently her mother was a very cold person, and that there's this scene that I still find so shattering where, so when her lupus was very advanced, she had to use these crutches, and there was this scene of Flannery trying to come down the aisle to church, and she was totally struggling on her crutches. And the biographer wrote, and I can't remember whose recollection it was, but her mother just looked so completely put out and angry and impatient. And so that to me is just one of the most moving, kind of horrible things I've ever seen with a mother-daughter.
Wow. I love mothers, I just want to say. It's not like be down on mothers. Mothers are awesome.
They are.
Well, you've both written novels in which children grow up with all-powerful father figures. What was it like for each of you to bring this father character to life?
I mean, fathers, are much more complicated, I think. I wanted the father in this book to be, I think both the mother and the father to kind of be as essential as possible, kind of in the way that in myths, like, you understand Zeus by, how kind of consistently he does Zeus-like things. He doesn't surprise you ever. You know how he's going to behave. I mean, and the god of war is defined by essential characteristics. And in this way, I think this father represents a kind of father, a kind of macho, machismo, masculine fatherhood. I think that there are moments where he can surprise you with his softness and his kindness, but I very purposefully made the dynamic between the mother and the father essential in this kind of masculine, feminine way, because I was thinking a lot about gender and violence in the family, and so, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I'm going to stop there.
Yeah, I think similarly in this novel, the parents' relationship has its own life, and then the parents' relationship with the son, and I think with Einstein and his father, I think he's a person who will do anything to please his father, but his father is so stoic, he doesn't really let on with what is pleasing to him, and so this is infinitely frustrating to Einstein, and it's also sort of indicative of a certain, it's not just a cultural difference, but if in Korean culture, it's changing, but parents don't embrace their children. It's just considered, you don't say, I love you, like that's just, to the Korean ear, that just seems really weird and sentimental. But then, when we're growing up here in this culture, we kind of expect that and want that. And so I kind of have this idea that Youngman has this whole inner life and how much he loves his son, and he feels like it should be implicit because where he grew up, that's implicit. But then Einstein always feels like he's just always disappointing his father and can never do enough. And that it's this sort of almost miscommunication where they just love each other so much, but they end up just missing the train, both of them.
Thank you both. You both make really gorgeous and interesting use of private language in your books. In your new novel, Marie, you characterize one of your two protagonists, Einstein Alfred Nobel Kwok, MD, by giving him his own private names for things. So when he's studying at his father's insistence to get into medical school, he privately calls his father Poji, which we learn is not a very polite thing to call your father, or anyone else for that matter. He calls doing his homework Poji's study gulag, and he calls the index cards on which he keeps his most vital notes his ectopic brain. Justin, in Us Proper, you give the three brothers what you call a special cave language in which they speak in unison, us hungry, and later, us burglars. And when their father beats them, us scared, and us fucked. What's on your mind when you use moments of private language in your writing, and how does it feel?
I think that's something I miss about childhood. So it was a really fun kind of element to explore. I mean, that was the best part, right? It was just like coming up with your own world, your own rules for that world, your own explanations of like the way that magic works in your world, and your own language to describe the kind of never-ending game that you're playing. So I think it's delightful. I think I had that with friends as well, less so now, but but I don't know what happened. What happened to that? Why don't I speak in slang constantly and all the time? Yeah, maybe I'll return to that. Maybe I'll return to private
the time
language.
has come.
Yeah.
I think for me, particularly with this book, I don't know anything about medicine, but I became so enamored with the idea. It's not quite terms of art, but the weird, antiquated jargon that doctors use. And I think for Einstein, to some degree, this is his way to fit in. His way to fit in is by excluding others or making sure he's in some club. And for him, because the terms of art are so, it really is just sort of more of an insider babble. Because, for instance, if you want to write on a chart, you don't give them anything to eat or drink. You wrote NPO, which is non per os, nothing by mouth in Latin. But so you can. So and the initials are NPO. So if you're the doctor, you can be like, oh, he's NPO. But then it's completely mystifying for the outsider. And so for Einstein, he enjoys not only like these terms of art, but then also the rigid hierarchies, because I think because of his race, he never knows where he stands, and he's terrible with women, and that's also another problem. But as a doctor, he's got these hierarchies, he's got the language, and it gives him a certain sort of comfort.
Fun. Thank you. You are both interested in hunger and food, and in the fine line between food and dirt. Justin's brothers put on raincoats, and then the brothers in Justin's novel put on raincoats and then smashed tomatoes on both each other and, at her insistence, on their mother. In Somebody's Daughter, Koreans facing starvation eat the boiled garbage of American soldiers. Would you tell us a story about food and writing? And you can feel free to take the question literally and talk about what you eat or what you wish you were eating while you're writing. Or I'd love to hear about what it was like to write one of the gross or beguiling food scenes in your books. Maybe the pretzel scene in Ducks, or the blackened sparrow in Somebody's Daughter.
I mean, I think it's easier for me to talk about hunger as a metaphor, because I think that is what that's the reason why kind of hunger is returned to so much in the book, because I think these kids want more than they're getting all the time. I remember I was on a radio program with this woman who just refused to acknowledge that this was not a memoir, and so she would just, every question was just so what was this like? It was and her first question with me was just like, how hungry were you? And I was like, what? I was like, sometimes I was really hungry, and then I ate something and I felt a little better. What kind of question is that? It was so sensational and odd.
It's odd.
But but hunger itself, I loved writing about the idea of just that kind of that children are just these mouths, these giant mouths, and they just want experience, they want love, they want food, they want comfort and shelter, and they can't, and you just have to keep giving, and if they're denied, they will go a little wild. Yeah.
I actually want to ask Justin something about the memoir
Please.
aspect, because with Somebody's Daughter, even though it said I was born blah blah blah, everyone would always say, oh, so when you were adopted, blah blah blah, or that's a nice picture of you in the cover, blah blah blah. Do you think that it's at all something that is more commonly done to conflate experience with imagination with writers of color?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I was just talking about this the other day with my friend Ayanna Mathis, who has a book out right now.
A great book.
It's a great book. And we were talking about this. I can't remember the exact context, but I think that somebody wrote something, and it was an Indian author, and he was being challenged because they were saying, well, this is fitting too many Indian stereotypes. And it was but if you were a white writer, and being challenged by a white person, and if you were a white writer, people just don't do that, because you can't.
It's
because
built rock and too many Jewish stereotypes, right? You don't kind of.
Yeah, so it only exists, I think, the idea that, that there is a general type, and that you're either writing towards that type or writing away from that type, is only something that you have to confront if you're writing from outside the center, or outside the white center, because they don't confront that problem. Yeah.
Or I almost felt that with writers of color, it's sort of, there are certain archetype, and so it's sort of, you just write about what happens to you because you look like the person on the cover, where in some ways that's kind of obviously shortchanging you as a creative artist, because there are, Thomas Wolfe kind of wrote about what happened to him too, but you wouldn't say that's memoir. So
Yeah.
I was curious.
I know, it's strange. But then again, I mean, the book is so close to my personal experience that it's like, I give people a lot of leeway. I mean, it infuriates. I get more infuriated on other people's behalf. You know what I mean? Like somebody mistaking you with the cover of your book, like that's just crazy. But I think that a lot of the hard facts do align with my life, so it's not like it's not that.
But I almost feel like there's this urge that you want. Because actually, I remember when somebody's daughter came out, my publicist at Beacon was Korean American, but she looked totally different. She had short hair, she had braces. And when she was near the book, everyone would say, "Oh, is that you?" So I had this rule: all Korean Americans have to stay 100 feet away from the book. Because it almost, you know what I'm saying? Like, there's almost this urge, like, this has to be somebody because they wrote about this Asian thing and there's a grandma in it or something. I don't know. Sorry, I got off track.
No, don't say sorry. I'm so glad you're talking about this. Do you want to talk about food, or do you want to keep going?
We can keep going. I'm hungry.
Well, my other question was also about hunger, and Justin sort of addressed it, which is the two of you are not just interested in hunger, you're interested in limitless, brutal hunger. Let's call it rapacity. In Justin's case, the hungry brothers who fight kennel style get compared to all-consuming locusts. And in her new novel, Marie writes about a corporation bent on sucking both its customers and employees absolutely dry. Where do you see art and the artist in this dog-eat-dog world?
Artists tend to have the antenna for what's going on in society, and I've just always been amazed at how prescient so many novels have been. If you read one of Jennifer Egan's novels, I think it was Look at Me, she wrote about terrorism and about someone trying to blow something up like a long time before. So I think for me, and I'm hoping, I consider this to be a big social novel, that I guess I do feel that in some ways, that's why I made the novel really funny, because my vision of what's happening to a society where we're just emptying out all our natural resources, we're polluting the air, you can't even see the sky in Beijing, and then what's happening to our medical system where it's not about healing, it's all about who gets the money, and the healing is so secondary, and then there is a lot of money to be made, so that is kind of my vision of when everything is feeding on everything, where is this going to end? And it's probably not going to end well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if the question is how artists should approach the problems that we have in the world, I feel like there are just so many answers, and I think that satire does an amazing job, but I would never write satire. It's just not something that I'm drawn to. But I think that it can bring your attention to issues more directly and quickly, than literary fiction can sometimes. I think that the particular approach that I take about kind of the brutality that I see in the world, and it's to try and make a complicated representation and try to write about violence or whatever issues are important to me, sexuality, things like that, in ways that are complicated, they don't have a direct agenda, but just the only agenda is to complicate what's out there.
I actually laughed at some of the parts in We the Animals. There's actually a lot of humor in it.
Yes, there is.
Okay.
I was talking about this earlier. We were just talking about this before I came and sat down here, that I feel like maybe 10% of the people who read it are like, "This book's really funny," and I'm like, "Yes." I think a lot of people are what? They don't feel they have permission to laugh, but I want it to be funny.
Cool.
Sure. But it's not a satire,
So I loved Marie's question about being conflated with one's work, about writers of color being conflated with their work, and I thought, wow, awesome question. And I wanted to ask also, what is one other question you'd like to ask each other?
I mean, I was actually fascinated by the opening chapter that you read of your novel, and so I guess my question is like, where does it go? Like, what are you addressing in this book? What are your kind of obsessions for the book?
I think the two main threads are sort of the corporate idea and what's happening to the future of medicine if we completely satirize what's going on now. But the second part of then is also what I'm calling a micro-history of this family. And, for young men, we see very little of him, but that he's lived through a really tumultuous time in Korean history, the occupation, the Korean War. He's an immigrant from North Korea, and just sort of how these scars can be recapitulated in the next generation without them knowing. So, and the book is actually, it's very inspired by Middlemarch, so it has a lot to do with weird hierarchies, and medicine is perfect for that, and just like, like in a village with a lot of things going on. So it's.
And so does it switch perspectives a lot?
It has sort of an omniscient, it goes all around to a lot of people.
And it's 800 pages?
It's 750 now. I've been working on it. Worked on it today. I made this shorter. But then, in a weird way, I was so gratified that a publisher would actually look at a book that's that big.
Yeah.
And in this day and age, because a lot of it is, it's so long, it's going to cost more to print it. Yeah. So I just was very gratified. And my question for you is that I read this book in a fever dream, and I couldn't put it down, and it was so poetic. I was curious did you write it in a fever dream, or was it this gigantic thing that you pared down?
No, I mean, it took me 5 or 6 years to write, which is why when you say 800 pages, I was like, the book is this big.
I know, one of my chapters is bigger than that.
Yeah, that would be like 2 decades, I think. It would
no,
take
but
me
I
to
just write
pages.
a lot.
I write really, really slowly. I write really very, very slowly, and I don't produce a lot of extra drafts or things that aren't going to go in there. I think I do that kind of in my head, away from the keyboard, but I'm not somebody that's like just going to write and write and write and write. It's just not the way that I work. So I wrote it really ploddingly and slowly, and each little snippet.
So you didn't try on different things and change it? You felt like it was
there was a moment when I got to Iowa where everybody was like, "That's not a novel. You're not writing a novel." And I was like, "Oh, I'm not writing a novel." And then I wrote this just to fill it out. I wrote this second narrative that was supposed to weave between. Really, it was just a completely separate project altogether, because I didn't actually want to fuck with this. Yeah, I was trying to fit it. It was a mistake. Nobody will ever see the light of day. It's gone now. But it was slow. It was slow, yeah.
The way I do it is I waste a lot of trees. So it's kind of sad.
You print it all out? and
I write by hand, so I have a billion notebooks, and then I print it out, and then I edit.
Yeah.
I feel bad. I really am an environmentalist.
I feel like that's the real writer way, though. That's my dirty little secret, is that
No, that's ironic. See, I feel like your way is better because I feel like I don't know what I'm doing, and then I'm always just going over and over on it again and doing endless drafts.
But then you have, archives,
Sort of.
One day, people will, go to your archives, and they'll be like, you changed the to
I actually had, the Library of Congress wanted the archives from somebody's daughter. So I sent them all this amazing stuff, and plus a lot of it I wrote before the internet was so a lot of it's hard copy stuff. These interviews, I had actual tapes of these oral histories I did. Do you know they lost the box?
Oh my God.
It is somewhere in the archives of the Smithsonian, and somebody is going to better find it. Yes.
That's amazing and horrifying.
Yeah, because at first I thought, this is great. I don't have room in my New York apartment for all my stuff. I'll just send it to Library of Congress, use them as a climate-controlled closet. And then, so I haven't sent the next box yet.
I was about to ask you if you could sue, but
I know.
I would reveal my trashy roots. I was like, can you sue them?
You can't sue the government.
I like thinking of the science fiction future where someone will find the box.
Right.
In A Canicle for Leibowitz, where this the famous Leibowitz, all they have of him is his like grocery list, and a monk makes it into an illuminated manuscript. Like somebody is going to see that as like the key.
All those old Life magazines and these weird tapes.
Well, I love the Middlemarch idea in that I think that what's great is that kind of mistakes made very early on in the novel just snowball and snowball and
exactly.
snowball. That in both novels and to very satisfying and horrifying effect. And I really love the idea that you sort of made a fake writing project in order to protect your real project. Like, the workshop environment can be kind of harrowing, and you dealt with it by inventing a whole other book that you were going to get workshopped and then you've got this thing that like didn't have to go through that. Very cunning.
Yeah, it was mostly done when I got there. Not completely, but mostly done. Yeah, and I really. Yeah, I kind of gave them, I was like, oh, chew on this.
The decoy draft.
I'm going to tear it up anyway.
That's great.
Wow. Is there anything that you've thought of that you'd like to say before we turn this over to the people in the audience?
No, bring it on.
I had a question, Justin, when you were saying that you created this extra thread and this stuff that you're going to tear up anyway. What you got out of the writers workshop?
I'm not saying this because I'm being recorded. I really actually did enjoy Iowa a lot. I got a ton out of it. I think that what the workshop does, or what MFAs do, is bring together like-minded people, give them time to focus on nothing but writing, and I mean that's amazing. The actual workshop itself, I'm skeptical about. I think that there might be other ways to approach what happens in the classroom around a table, rather than just lots of opinions. But what happens outside the workshop, at the bars, like drinking until 3 a.m. and being like, are you a verb man or an adjective man? You know what I mean? And really where's the power in fiction? Like these debates about ethics and aesthetics and why we're doing what we're doing, and should we put limits on ourselves, or should we be able to write really offensive, horrible things? We would talk about this and we would hash it out, and there were people working in all different styles and forms, and that was so generative and productive. So if the workshop is what gets us all there, then you know what I mean. Then I think that's really a great thing. Do you have thoughts about workshop MFAs?
I don't have an MFA. So the idiot savant thing is my deal.
Hi, I'm Mark, and my question is for Marie. I'm curious about what you make of how so many Korean American writers have mixed race characters as kind of the central characters in their novels. I'm thinking of Nora Jo Keller, Chang Rae Lee, Heinzen Zhu Fenkel. I guess which is interesting from personal experience, because having grown up in Korean American spaces and lived in Seoul for a bit, I don't think Koreans or Korean Americans think of mixed race folks as central to Korean American stories or narratives at all, but you have this literature with really fleshed out mixed race characters coming from Korean Americans.
Oh, that's a good question. Although, Nora and Heinz are both mixed race themselves. With Sarah, she thinks that she's not mixed race. So the reason that I think my artistic decision to make her mixed race was also to punctuate the idea of we never really know who we are, and our sense of self is just assembled by what we think we know and how we see other people seeing us. And so because she is also seen as being completely Korean, that also just sort of seals it for her. And if you've read my novel, there's also another character who's half, but he's very American looking, and he gets very rejected when he's in Korea because of the way he looks, even though since he grew up in an army base, he's fluent in Korean. So in their own bizarre way, they kind of make one functioning Korean, because Sarah looks totally Korean, but she doesn't speak Korean, and so when she's in Korea, she's just totally having a tough time. But then this guy who looks American doesn't look Korean at all, is somehow culturally Korean. And so that was that was a deliberate choice on my part to show the various ways that we can be so sure of who we are, and we're not. We actually don't really know who we are.
That's kind of a brilliant scene, by the way, when he's looking at her and saying, like, hey, you, like, describing her features as Korean beautiful, and they're, like, it's her eyelids, her hair, like he's describing the things that are tip-offs, or could be tip-offs to the reader, like, wait, you're only half Korean, but she doesn't get it, and he doesn't get it. It's a great moment.
Thanks. You should read the novel very closely.
Please.
Hi, my name is Jia Jung, and thank you. And I was just going to say it's interesting because both of you have discussed how your protagonists as children expect or want things that are greater than what their parents can give. But in the passages that you both chose to read, what you really brought home for me was the other flow of desire, which is what only a mother can exact upon a child. And without saying anything about my mother, I'll say it goes beyond stuff like, oh, do well in school or make your bed. It's really like, you came out of me, you are mine, you are my baby. And it really reflects in your characters, like Justin, your character promises to be 6 years old forever, and Einstein foregoes going to the bathroom just to stay on the phone with his mother. And these are really serious themes. And I think they're just so transcendent, but they're often boxed in with the identity of the writer. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your personal viewpoints on that and how it translates to your writing.
That's a good point, though, because those are really parallel in their own bizarre way.
Yeah.
Nice work, you guys.
Yeah,
good point.
That's a sharp mind at work. Yeah. I mean, I think that what in that scene, what I was kind of, I mean, there's a lot of things that I think I was trying to write about, but one of them was kind of the horror that you have as a child when you wake up to your parents' desires. When all of a sudden you're aware, you're like, you want something from me? I always want something from you, but you want something from me, and then whether or not you choose to play that role, or whether or not you choose to fulfill that role, and I think it's a very it's always a kind of really fraught moment. So I think that that's kind of what I was trying to address.
I think for mine, the nuclear fission that is about to happen is Einstein is not only an only child, but he's the only son. And in Korean culture, the firstborn son of the title, that is so important. It's not only the person who, inherits everything, but it's also the person who's responsible for the parents. So it's not only you get everything, but it's a huge responsibility. And then the Myung-Ok character is somebody who's so full of rage because for someone of her generation, she basically married young, came over here, didn't really know what she was doing, had a kid, and then spent her whole life just sort of flailing around with this man that she doesn't love. And then she doesn't have anything left except for Einstein. And so she has put not only all her physical, self into him, but he is her creativity, he is her meaning. And so for her, she would probably be dead except that she has to get up because Einstein is there. And that is sort of the thing that animates her, or that she thinks animates her. She's lived her life basically for everybody else except herself, and this is sort of how she ends up, and that's why she's so angry.
So you were just to go back to the topic of inserting yourself into your narrative, or how much do you insert yourself into the story. When I write, either I find that I completely distance myself from what I'm writing about, so that somebody goes, oh, you should write what you know, and that, because somehow I can't write about women, or I can't write about issues that I didn't experience. Or I actively say, I'm going to write something that happened to my family or something like that, and then it becomes thinly veiled nonfiction, and my mother calls me in tears going, thank you for writing a story about me, or something like that. So I'm just wondering how you find that middle ground, or is there a middle ground, or is there even an extreme of either way? So.
I can't believe she thanked you.
I know.
Perhaps in a passive-aggressive way?
I mean, this is like something that I write from personal experience. It's what I'm interested in doing. It's like that is what I enjoy. I haven't spent a lot of time kind of, struggling to do something else or feeling like I need to do something else. I've had a lot of people tell me that I'm not, that like I'm not a real fiction writer, and that if I was a real writer, like I wouldn't be writing about myself, But it's not something. I just think it's a mode that I'm very comfortable in, and I think that it's just that's what I do. So I don't really grapple with that much. I think that the whole notion that that like you can't write across gender, I mean, that's like insane, like I remember I was in this workshop once and we were reading a book by Jane Smiley, and the workshop leader, who I'm not going to name because we're being recorded, was talking about how like, because the book is narrated, but it was The Age of Grief, which is narrated by a man, and he was just saying like, well, I just don't really think that like Jane Smiley like was able to like inhabit masculinity and manhood, And I was like, what? Like, as if all men are universally the same, Like it drove me crazy, and that kind of thing always infuriates me. So as much as I do write from personal experience, and I write characters that are very similar, kind of socioeconomically and demographically to myself, I don't think that is like it's what needs to be done. Write what you know, I think, is a completely empty saying. I think it's impossible to do otherwise. Like, how could you do that? You have to know something in order to write it, But anyway.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think I work in a different way where everything I've done has been animated by a need to know something. And it usually starts with just a question like, what if? Like, I had this idea, what if this Korean adoptee is growing up in this weird town and she goes to Korea and finds out her mom's actually not dead? And then everything I've done, I slowly understand the research that I need to do to get to that point. And then this book, there's a lot, I don't know anything about being a doctor. I actually had to literally go back to medical school and so forth. So because I didn't know it. But at the same time, there are just weird things in my life that I pull out. And I think there's two threads. Like, the pleasure for me is the negative capability, being able to inhabit different experiences that are not my own. But at the same time, I also actually have the secret thing that I feel that a lot of my characters they're just like a million different disguised versions of me, and often like my worst tendencies. So I can kind of exercise my worst tendencies by making it some man who's 60 years old. So you could say in some ways it's deeply autobiographical. It's still writing what you know, but it's deeply autobiographical. So it's sort of just a mutated thing what you do, basically.
Yeah.
Marianne Moore had the phrase "imaginary gardens with real toads in them," and I think that part of what we do as fiction writers is construct this artificial reality and then put our own feeling selves into that reality and see how we'd feel, And I guess the one thing I'd add to the write what you know business is, you can know more. You can send yourself to medical school. You can teach yourself a new language. You can go to a new place. Like, there's so much to know that I don't think that write what you know is necessarily limiting. I think it's an invitation to like know more and bring that to the work.
Right. Grace Paley said, you got to write to know what you know, or know what you don't know. But you get the idea.
You write, you find out, like, I'm just writing bullshit. And then you go research, and you're like, everything that you're researching is suddenly so interesting because you need it for the work. Whereas if you're just reading some history book, you might have shut it and turned to something else. But, I think that starting to write creates a hunger to get it right.
Exactly.
My question is related. I thought, as you were reading, how completely both of you inhabited the characters that you were reading, and it made me think of actors and how you're I wondered if you'd done any acting, and also if when you're done writing, if any of those perspectives of your characters like hit you in your daily life, like just after you've, I don't know. I just wonder if it comes back.
Oh, that's funny. Well, this novel has taken me 8 years to write, so the reason I just know these characters so well. I've lived with them for 8 years, and I often think, oh, Einstein would like that. He probably wouldn't recycle that. Things like that. Yeah, definitely.
I am the worst actor in the world. I was in the 5th grade school play, and the music teacher just made up a part for me because she knew I had a troubled home life, and she wanted me to like be around.
Aww.
But she was like, "You're not very good on stage," so she gave me one line.
What was it?
Did she make you be a shrub or something?
It was like a statistic about like Hank Aaron. It was a baseball. Anyway, I've gone down the rabbit hole. Anyway, I'm a very bad actor, but I think that like the concept of like method acting and like, you know, kind of deeply inhabiting and imagining and, you know, those kind of tricks of, you know, like how would, you know, I'm playing Ernest Hemingway in a new movie, like how would I eat this orange, you know, like that, all of that kind of stuff I think is similar to what I think you have to do as a writer. I think that I've never been one of those people that's like, my characters like come to me and talk in my head, and I'm just transcribing what they say as they speak to me. That sounds crazy to me. I mean, I don't know. You know, I think a lot about, you know, the circumstances of a character that I'm creating, and try to imagine what it would be like to be that person. Yeah. I don't know. Do your characters come to you? Do they speak to you in your head?
They kind of do.
Yeah. This is another way in which I'm a bad writer. All real writers that I talk to are like, their characters speak to them in their head.
Makes you seem kind of psycho. So, and I actually do, I read a lot out loud. So that might be also why I've gotten the cadences down. I read this entire novel out loud to myself, just to hear.
Do your characters speak to you in your head?
Not exactly. I'd say I sit there writing instructions to myself, like, and then she'll do that, and then he'll say this, and then this should happen, and then like suddenly while I'm doing that, I switch from writing instructions to actually writing the writing. So it's kind of like I'm kind of like, roar, roar, roar. And then finally when it goes, maybe it is like the character talking in my head, but it's more like the character talking on the page.
I'm just curious to know what the sort of role of like theory or the overarching theme plays when you guys are actually writing. So like when you talk about like belonging or like corporate hunger or whatever, but how does that actually come into play when you're writing?
Yeah, I think that because I am kind of slow in plotting, I often I have an obsession. You know, I have like the themes that are just define my life, like race and class and sexuality and like, you know, stuff like that. They're just kind of the ways in which I view the world. And then I have very specific things, like I want to talk about a specific dynamic between, you know, young parents and their children, or I want to talk about, you know, a parenting model. So I have a chapter where the father teaches the narrator how to swim, and he does so by throwing him in the middle of the lake and just like letting him figure out, which was a metaphor for like sink or swim, like a parenting style. And so it goes like, you know, it goes kind of down, and then I'm like, what would be the exact right, like actual thing to happen in the story or in the chapter or in the moment that would, you know, that would like kind of bring that metaphor to life. Which I think is, again, you know, I don't know many people who do that in that way, but that's why everything I write is really condensed and really short, and because I'm often, you know, thinking a lot first about big themes and then kind of going down to the moment, if that makes sense. Yeah.
I wonder if maybe that's why you write these lapidary little, and mine's big, because my process is almost exactly opposite to yours, where, you know, I understand now that the book is done, that I've written this book about corporate hierarchies and, I don't know, capitalism, but when I'm writing it, I'm trying to be really careful to just sort of be just looking at what's going on in the story and being in the middle of it and not trying to think of our overarching themes, because I don't want my book to have some theme that I want. It's more like it just kind of comes. And for instance, so at one point, Einstein is monetizing himself by working for this boutique, and I had him, he has an opportunity to do cosmetic gynecology, which has to do with gynecological surgery to make parts look better, and there actually is something that exists. So when I was writing that, just as here's Einstein doing this, I was introduced to this interesting, horrible world of cosmetic gynecology and seeing how lucrative it is and so forth. And then so I couldn't not help wanting to know more about it and going to these conferences and talking to these doctors and just knowing more and more about it. Well, because also you kind of can't write about it unless you actually know how it's done. And so this is a long story, but they actually thought I was a doctor, which is how I got to go in. And then they would show me these things where, these things like, okay, here's our new radiostatic scalpel. Pretend the steak is a vagina, and I will take this scalpel, and I'm thinking, whoa, this is completely crazy. So, but at the same time, when I saw that, like, how can I not have the guy taking a scalpel, to his steak and saying it's a vagina? But all that never made it into the novel, and I knew that it shouldn't, because I didn't want the theme to be so bald, so I actually ended up, to get it out of my system, I ended up writing about it for nonfiction, and all my outrage coming out about what happens when primary care doctors decide to monetize things and just do these completely useless, horrible, misogynist cosmetic surgeries. But I knew exactly that I didn't want the book to be like, oh my God, corporate medicine. So I just excised that and got out all my fun observations. Like at one point too, it was this really nice hotel, and they actually like wheeled in like this gurney. And anyways, so you kind of, as a writer, nothing is wasted. So,
did you say a steak?
Yes.
Wow. I think you said a stick at first. And I was like,
no,
oh,
it's a
weird.
steak. And he said, see, there's less thermal damage with a radiographic scalpel.
Wow. But yeah, I think if you're writing a plotted novel, then approaching it thematically is going to get you. It's going to seem too heavy-handed. I think I tend to write more poetically, maybe, or more like on a micro level, and I'm not that concerned with plot. So, yeah.
I want to specifically address what you said about theme in terms of, there's one scene in the new book where Einstein's I think he comes home from one of those crazy conferences, and he opens a magazine in the newspaper. He opens a magazine in the airplane, and there's a story about a woman giving birth all by herself without a doctor, and ta-da, she did it. And he feels totally useless and emasculated. Like, our whole profession of gynecology is kind of whatever. And I wondered, did that scene, and that seems to be kind of like a thematic choice to include that scene, like, well, actually all of gynecology is sort of, helping people do something that they often have for thousands of years done themselves. Did that scene get written in the first draft or in the rewrite?
It was definitely in the rewrite.
Like it was a more conscious, like, going to flesh out the theme here?
I think it was more conscious, because I think by then I also realized that, Einstein has just hung up so much of his self on being a doctor, and that's kind of a climactic scene for him, just because he feels like if he could just become a doctor, everything will be all right. And then for him to realize that, no, actually, a lot of what they do is bullshit. And you know what I mean? Even just like when he gets the white coat at Harvard Medical School, they have a whole ceremony, and it's completely like, we've got this white coat. But then at some point he'll realize, wow, actually butchers wear white coats too, and why does this white coat do anything? It's just this visual signifier. So he's finally realizing sort of the fraud in his life. But it's also kind of freeing for him, because then that's when all his, all the deceptions fall away, and he sees what he truly is.
You're going to love it, you guys. I guess I'd add that for me, right, the first draft Like I kind of have a general sense of like, well, these are the things that are interesting to me, and then I set it aside and I write a first draft. And then when I'm writing a second draft, the first draft always has like a million extra secondary characters that like need pruning desperately and need specifically conflating into a few secondary characters who you can kind of keep track of, which means that the secondary characters show up more frequently and you feel reassured by secondary characters rather than, no more names, don't make me learn more names. And it's in working, knowing who those secondary characters are, what they're doing, what their job is in the world of the book, that I feel like I'm making thematic choices. Like, okay, I'm writing about modernizing Japan. I need a modernizer. And so, that's a secondary character. Whereas if I was like, I'm writing about modernizing Japan, I'm going to have my protagonist be a modernizer, I think that would feel more like a lecture and less like a novel. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Eileen. Thank you, Jonah. Thank you to the Hyman Center. And thank you to our amazing authors, Marie and Justin.